Uber, the company who absolutely obliterated the taxis. I mean, when was the last time you saw a taxi? And they're definitely not as popular as they were before. It's going to be a neutral view on Uber. I'm going to cover their financials, their business model, their segments, and also their strengths and weaknesses. By the way, this is all based off of the annual and quarterly reports. Revenue is growing pretty steadily, but they did have a slight dip during the pandemic, which perfectly logical. I mean, if everyone's stuck inside, you're not really going to go rideshare, so makes sense. But afterwards, they had some pretty insane growth. Their 2023 numbers were almost 3 times their 2019 numbers. Revenue for 2023 was $37 billion. Now let's move on to EBITDA. EBITDA is basically earnings before interest, taxes, amortization, and depreciation. This is basically what the core business actually does. For example, let's say you decide to start up a lemonade stand. EBITDA is going to basically be the earnings that you get after you pay for all the cups and whatever and sell the lemonade to people. It's not going to account for, let's say, the interest on the business loan that you use to start up a lemonade stand. I don't know why you need a business loan for that, but that's basically how it works. We'll be covering net income too, but let's just cover EBITDA first, and you will see why in a second. So, from their start all the way to 2022, it's all negative, and that's rough. That's basically the income from them doing the actual ride-sharing stuff. And then in 2023, it's positive. We can't act as if EBITDA is enough. We also do have to take into account interest on loans and also taxes. It was technically a profit in 2018, but 1.98 billion of that was due to unrealized gains in shares of a company. That car company is called Diddy. That loss in 2019 before COVID, well, there's no real reason for that. Costs just sort of went up in every single category. There was a pretty big jump from 2018, but then it was slightly decreased in 2020. By the way, to help cover that loss in 2019, they did issue $8 billion worth of shares. If you're asking what happened in 2022, it's loss on unrealized debt and equity. $7 billion in the down direction. It's the same thing as 2018 rather, but then it's just the other direction. 7 billion in the negative. By the way, this does fluctuate every single year. 3 billion of it was from Aurora. Then there was Grab, which is basically a super app for ride sharing. That also suffered a pretty big loss. Then there was the food delivery company called Zomato and Diddy. Speaking of Diddy, not that Diddy. Uber exited China in 2016 and they sold their Uber in China to a company called Diddy, which is basically a car/ride sharing app in China. In that deal, Uber got equity in Diddy. That caused the around $2 billion increase in 2018, and also they had a $1.7 billion loss in 2020. By the way, all unrealized. They did end up going public in 2021, and Uber sold $500 million worth of shares, and then they got delisted from the New York Stock Exchange, so it's a whole story. And yes, I am going to get into the companies that Uber has an equity stake in. Now, let's move on to the IPO. That was on May 9th, 2019. This is going to be a comparison of Uber's performance compared to Lyft and also the S&P 500 index. After their IPO, they had a pretty big drop-off. Lyft just went downhill and just continued going downhill, but Uber did pretty well. It started to become profitable in 2023, and I guess investors really like that. And none of that fair value stuff. That's just cheating. Ended off with Uber at 52%, Lyft at negative 80%, and the S&P 500 index at 87%. By the way, I did shorten the timeline to 2019, not the 8 years that I usually do, because Uber and Lyft only really went public in 2019. Uber has 3 main segments. Mobility, where basically a car shows up, pick up people, drive them wherever they want to go, drop them off. You know the drill. They also have Uber Delivery, which is basically Uber Eats and all that stuff. And they also do freight. Yes, they do freight. Revenue-wise, mobility is up to $20 billion. This is up around 41% from last year. Uber Delivery, slightly up, $12 billion. It's pretty great, but nothing crazy. And as for freight, pretty big decrease. They're now at $5.2 billion in revenue in this category. The reason, according to Uber, is declining revenue per booking and also just the total number of bookings. Looking at EBITDA, which is basically all the revenue for that category minus all the associated expenses. By the way, it does not include the, for example, common accounting expenses across a whole company, common HR expenses, legal expenses, all that. There is a segment for corporate and other and all that stuff, but this is just the income from each individual segment. Mobility this year became far more profitable, 50% more profitable, and delivery, well, that had a massive increase, almost 3 times more profitable. So it's great. Freight had a slight decrease, but it's honestly whatever. If you've ever wondered what company Uber has equity in, well, they have equity in Postmates and also a company called Careem. They bought that for $3.1 billion, and if I had to put in words, basically Uber for the more Muslim world. They started in Dubai and just expanded into the more Muslim world. They also have Transplace, which is basically a logistics technology company. Super exciting stuff. Zomato is also a company they have shares in, and it's basically a food delivery company in India. They also own shares in a company called Lime, which is basically a scooter / bike sharing company. This is one company I actually kind of like. They own 29% of it as of April 8th, 2024, according to Bloomberg. I tried it out once and it's pretty cool. You basically rent a scooter and just can go places and drop it off at their pickup and drop off locations. Although my thing is, if you actually use this to get to work daily, why don't you just buy your own? Uber's current CEO, Khosrowshahi, I'm so sorry if I butchered your name, Dara, he sold 1.5 million shares, not dollars, shares. Although to be fair, he still does own 1.3 million shares, which is worth ballpark 92 million. Let's move on to strengths. First of all, their brand. Let's say you want to get somewhere, but you don't have access to a car. Who are you gonna call? I'm waiting. Uber is really the only option. Maybe Lyft, but Uber, they kind of won. Let's say you're coming back from a night out, drank a little bit, you better Uber it up. They also have diversified slightly into more delivery and a bit of freight too. Weaknesses wise, on the delivery side especially, everything is pretty expensive. The food's more pricier, you also have to pay an Uber fee, then you have to pay the driver, the tip and all that, so it does add up, and it's way more expensive than just going to the store and buying it. Opportunities wise, freight could grow. Right now it's a pretty small part of their segment, but eventually it could develop into something massive. This is just my idea. I have no idea if this works, but what if there's a program where Uber could basically train the people who drive in the city, picking up people, to drive freight? Because some people probably want a bit extra cash in. I'm not sure exactly how well Uber passengers actually pay. Some people are gonna want them and others are gonna hate it, but it's just an option. Another idea is, what if you could have automated cars? Let's say automated, self-driving cars or trucks just drive freight or people all over the city. That's why their workers could go on strike, or just the number of cars or drivers available on the road might decrease, and that is a pretty big threat. Another threat is Uber employees being classified as W-2 instead of independent / gig workers. I'm not going to make any moral judgment on this, but Uber claims that they're either independent or gig workers, but in California they did try to make them W-2. That did fail, but that's just something to be aware of. It could happen again. Another threat is taxi lobbyists. Although to be fair, they have kind of lost the battle. They could pop back up, maybe. Okay, this deserves its own separate category. This is an existential threat. Self-driving cars. Take it back to, let's say, 2018, I never would have expected Sora or ChatGPT to be anywhere near as good as they are now. And if self-driving is going to grow at that pace, that's going to be a massive problem. But also, we did used to think that we'd have flying cars by now, so take it with a grain of salt. If cars can just drive themselves, well, you have no need for a driver, and you best believe that there are people who are working on making that happen. If a company makes it, they're definitely going to license it out to one of the big automakers, or they can just have it done internally. And if you don't really need a person in the car to drive, well, that kind of takes away Uber's thing, doesn't it? You don't need a driver in the car. That'll just take care of a pretty big expense. We also don't know how insurance is going to act, and if the cars are going to be safer, less safe, or whatever. Actually, I take that back. Self-driving cars are probably going to be a lot safer than regular humans. Because here's my thing. The lobbyists in DC that do trucking lobbyists, Uber lobbyists, and all those, they're all going to come together to fight that. And if it turns out that self-driving is way less safe, best believe the lobbyists are going to go, there's no way that's going to be street legal. So if it comes out, it's probably going to be far safer. That's a rundown of Uber. This is not investment advice. This is basically the annual report that they publish every single year into video form. Anyway, guys, let me know what you guys think. Like, sub, talk to a financial advisor if you guys want actual financial advice, or check that out, and peace.